seat this morning. That's a good song, man. Good morning. Hey, thank you for putting up with a sick dog last week, because I was like death put in a microwave for 15 seconds. That's all I was. But everybody was nice and pretended not to notice I was coughing and splurging and all that stuff. So, wow, we're 3 weeks into a new series called Route 66. And we're kind of picking up on the American highway metaphor that there was a road built or highway built in the 20s and 30s of last century. And it stretches all the way from Chicago to Santa Monica. And somebody in the first hour said, and it went through Galt. I said, no, it didn't. No, it did not. Route 666 maybe, but not Route 66, right? Just I don't know. So, okay. I didn't know there was that many people from Galt in our church. Sorry. Let me just make a public apology right up front. It stuck out my throat. Hey, I do want to also remind you that we still have a whole bunch of these booklets on the Route 66, the artwork, and there's room for taking notes and things like that. So if you'd like to pick up one of those, I think they're like $5 out in guest services, or it's out there in Atrium somewhere. I just work here. I don't know where it is. But just like we're picking up on the metaphor of a Route 66 that connects major parts of America, God has given us his own Route 66 as well. We have one Bible. It's an amazing book. Nothing like it in all of history. One book made up of 66 books with astounding unity. Even though it was written over a period of about 1,600 years by approximately 40 different human authors, while the works and literature of mankind disagree a lot, this book demonstrates a unity that reveals that there's a mind and a heart, and God wants to connect his heart with yours, and that's something that he accomplishes brilliantly through this book. And so last week, or 2 weeks ago, we did an introductory message, and then last week we covered 3 chapters of the Bible, so we just have 65 books and 47 more chapters to go. We're making great progress, huh, church? And we started last week by opening up the Old Testament, which I kind of would prefer to call the First Testament, so you don't think it's useless. It's very useful. And we found out that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Genesis means beginning or beginnings, and that's what we do. We get information about how everything got started, and particularly in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, it's a primeval history of humanity and how things got started. And apart from the creation account in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, from chapters 3 to chapter 11 is kind of a downward spiral of human sin that basically God let people try to figure it out, and they didn't figure it out, and then he had to respond in judgment and even cleansing of the earth, as we'll see when we get to Noah. But chapters 1 and 2 is the creation of how everything gets started, and then the test. He told Adam just before the creation of Eve, you can eat liberally from any tree in the garden you want, except that one tree in the middle. There's the tree of life, you can eat from that, but not from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You can't eat that, because the day that you do, you will surely die. And that's exactly what happened in chapter 3. The first temptation occurs. Satan begins to interfere with human history in the Garden of Eden, and both Eve as well as Adam partake of this forbidden fruit. And as a result, there is curse that's placed upon the entire created world. And that curse is only going to be lifted when Jesus Christ is fully takes his throne on this earth. But in the meantime, we all live under a curse. And that curse is a result of sin. Sin gets passed on from generation to generation. That's why we're already born with a sinful nature, struggling against pretty mighty foes that would like to destroy us as well as take down God. It won't happen, but Satan is certainly leveling his lowest and best punches to try to make something go wrong. But when we get to chapter 3, we see something beautiful about our God, that in the midst of judgment, we still have mercy. We still have the promise of a future Redeemer. We have the promise of a liberator. The seed of the woman, it's prophesied. First prophecy in the Bible, Genesis 3:5. The seed of the woman, which ends up becoming the virgin birth of Christ, that first Christmas. He will crush Satan's head. And one day this war will be completely landed and over, and God wins. And everybody that sides with God wins as well. But what's sad is that you see what appears to be kind of, I know I'm not supposed to say this as a pastor, but some people think, what's the big deal about eating prohibited fruit? It was the one test that God gave the human race to see if they would love him and obey him based on his loving relationship with them. But we didn't get there. And so we go from chapter 3, eating the prohibited fruit, to chapter 4, in the opening verses of chapter 4, the first son of Adam and Eve kills the second son of Adam and Eve. Fratricide. Bad news. Chapter 4, you've got Cain killing Abel because he was jealous, and his jealousy turned into anger. I was just reading the text this morning before coming out here, and that anger and that jealousy boiled over not with the desire to live righteous like Abel, but to snuff out the voice of Abel so that Cain didn't look so good. And by the way, you never cancel evil with evil. Right? It's just a principle. But we learn early on through this story that sin erupts in violence. And that's why you have so much violence. That's the generation before Noah is described as corrupt and violent as well. And it just escalates. And second of all, that sin spirals and invades all of life. I mean, here you've got one brother killing another brother. And just before he did that, God spoke into Cain's life to try. The expression, the way of Cain, has become a really, it's a bad description of how to live an evil life. And you'll read about that in other parts of the scripture, the way of Cain, a bad deal. But before Cain actually executed what he was meditating, God spoke these words to him in Genesis chapter 4, verse 7. He said, Cain, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. There's a similar verse in the New Testament, 1 Peter 5:8, that says, Satan prowls around like a roaring lion seeking to devour. And so this is just the role of the enemy, trying to push us in a direction of evil, trying to push us to be flesh-driven rather than spirit-driven. And so as you think about this, I don't know if this helps at all, but as I was thinking about this, you have a fundamental choice that you're going to choose to do right with God's help and seek to be mastered by righteousness by doing what's right, or you're going to give way to sin, the way of Cain, and you're going to be mastered by sin. Jesus said anybody that sins becomes a slave of sin. And that's what happened with Cain. And as a result, he was cursed even further, cast out, taken. He was a man of the fields and growing things, and then he was cast away from the earth and had to build a city, and it's just a bad deal. Because as you look at it and you watch the growth of sin, Genesis is trying to show you that man by himself can't pull it off. In Genesis 3, you have the forbidden fruit. Genesis 4, at the beginning, you have the first murder within a family. By the time you get to the end, and by the way, Cain lies about it to God when God says, where's your brother? By the time you get to the end of chapter 4, you got a by the name of Lamech who said, I'm going to up Cain 7 times with my violent behavior, murdering people for having wounded him. And what you see, and he's bragging about it instead of hiding it, and he's bragging about it to his 2 wives. You've already diluted the biblical essence of marriage, which is one man and one woman in an exclusive relationship, not one man and multiple women or any other definition. One man, one woman, and an exclusive relationship, which represents the image of God. Okay? So once we get to the end of chapter 4, we realize God wasn't lying when he said, and when you do this, you're going to die. Because chapter 5 is an extensive genealogy, and the recurring refrain is, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. Mankind dies the second he sins spiritually. Mankind, therefore, releases physical death into his bloodstream as well. And we will eventually all physically die. Praise God. There's someone that's beat death, but I haven't gotten to that point of the story yet. But you may be sure of this. This is an easy one to remember. Everybody say, Numbers 32:23. See that? 32:23 is just inverted numbers. Good numbers that invert, right? Okay. You may be sure of this. Your sin will find you out. It's got a boomerang effect, folks. It's like spitting in the wind. It's going to catch up with you. And by the way, when sin does catch up with us, unless we seek redemption and forgiveness, it will give us our salary, and the wages of sin is death. That isn't just Romans 6:23. That's a principle burned throughout all of Scriptures. Sin leads to death and separation from God. And so we get in chapter 5 this genealogy of he died. And then in chapter 6, we see another awful event. It's the Noah's Ark and the universal flood. Chapter 6, if you brought your Bibles, I'd like you to turn to chapter 6. And I'd like you to see God's divine commentary on how far mankind had fallen from God's original plan. By the time you're 6 chapters into the Bible, it's already horrible. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, it says, "Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. By the way, that's how long it took to build the ark. The human race had 120 years of warning before God actually sent the flood. So we cannot say God didn't give them advance warning. If you look at verse 5, it says, "The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time." That's worse than the animal kingdom, folks. We're told also the Lord was grieved, chapter 6, verse 6. He was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, "I will wipe mankind, whom I have created, from the face of the earth." And he goes on speaking the fact that he was grieved and he must judge human beings because they so far missed God's purposes for their life. Verse 11 says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. But God found one person that was different, and his name was Noah. And he asked Noah and his family to build a glorified floating device that would preserve at least a male and a female of every animal, plus additional animals, clean animals for sacrifice, as well as his 3 sons and his sons' wives, and his wife. So there's 8 human beings that are going to be salvaged during this time of the flood. It's preceded by corruption, and God just finally says, "Hey, enough is enough." And actually, one of the lessons that just speaks loud as all can be is that God can't let sin go on forever. See, there's a problem with God's grace, because God's grace buys us time and mercy, and some people misinterpret that to mean God will sweep all evil under the rug and eventually everybody's going to be saved. That's called universalism, and it's a lie from the pit. Okay? You don't get away with sin forever. You can't just sin with impunity. And because the Lord is patient with you, he's giving you more time to respond to his grace invitation. But that's not an indefinite invitation. He will one day blow the whistle, game is over. Second of all, God will eventually judge every human being. Folks, you see this also in chapters 18 and 19 with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah for their sexual perversity. You look at Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9, it's about judgment and a universal flood. Genesis 18, 19, Sodom and Gomorrah. And all of a sudden you realize God has moral limits. And people can go past those limits. And we pay the price for that. So as you think about this, this is kind of interesting that when the chapter 7, the waters go up. Chapter 8, the waters come down. Chapter 9, those that were animals and the people on the ark come out and have a new beginning, right? And what's interesting, and I didn't put this in my notes, so I might say it wrong, but if you remember day 2 of creation, God separated the waters and took some below and took some up in clouds. What happens in the flood is he reverses the beauty and throws that back into chaos as the walls of water come up from the waters, fountains springing here, as well as raining for the first time in human history. You see the waters coming back into a chaos because of sin. And then in chapter 9, he's going to open it up again. And he's going to give a new start. And the cool thing is, as soon as Noah and his family get off the ark, they learn the lesson and everyone lives happily ever after. Right? Didn't quite happen that way. They had obviously taken some stalks for a vineyard to be planted on the ark. They plant it once the dry ground reappears. And during the first harvest, they get grapes. Noah makes wine. He gets drunk. His grandson Ham, or his son Ham, goes in, sees him naked, and makes a mockery out of it, which was no-no in the ancient world, right? And as a result of it, his other two sons go walking backwards, hiding his nakedness. And because of Ham's sin, God curses Ham and his family line, and his son's name was Canaan. Anybody ever heard that word before? The land of Canaan, who gets dispossessed by God's people, okay? Just all these pieces fit together. It's really cool. You ought to read the book. I like it. Okay. So, what's interesting to me is that 2008, Israel actually prints a whole bunch of stamps that come right out of Old Testament themes. So there's a lot of Genesis accounts. If you like stamps, you can buy these, and they're available today for $99. I'm just kidding. Nothing for sale. But you got a new beginning, right? And with this new beginning, they blow it again. Now, have you ever heard of communism before? The fundamental assumption under communism is that man is born good and society corrupts him. And they did not reconcile themselves with reality. The people that postulated that theory probably did not have children, because children are sinners, and it doesn't take society to bring the sin out of them, because it didn't take society to bring sin out of their parents either. We are corrupted from the inside, so you can't fix the environment and expect that to solve our problems. The problems are internal pollution that lead to external pollution. We are cursed with a sin nature that we fight against. Even as children of God, we fight against it. So after this new beginning, time passes, things get bad again, and it just, it all starts to fall apart with this new cleansed world. And finally, you get to chapter 11. Chapters 5 and chapters 10, as well as the backside of 11, are all genealogies, but it just explains this avalanche of evil till you get the whole world coming together, holding hands and saying, "We are the world, so we'll build Babel to rebel against the God who really loves us," right? Human unity is only good if it's based on truth, people. And you're only going to see a few times in history, past or future, where the whole world will come together in unity against God. That kind of unity isn't worth much. It needs to be truth and unity. Otherwise, it's just united rebellion. And that's what we see. You get this generation of people. God had told them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. They were fruitful, they were multiplying, but they all stuck together in a valley near Shinar. And instead of spreading out and filling the earth like God told them to do, they stayed united in their rebellion to build a tower that would be higher than any flood could reach. Are you catching this? If you read the text carefully, they're building materials for building the Tower of Shinar, or the Tower of Babel, were waterproof as well. They were essentially saying, we can make it to the heights on our own, and you can't stop us. So God said, oh, really? And he confused their language. Some people actually postulate this might be the beginning of when races separate too. And you have all this superiority, inferiority, all that stuff. But God scatters the human race because they can't understand each other. You come up to work one day and say, hey, did you bring some more bricks? The other guy says, hey, io non so cosa dici, perché non parli l'italiano. And they go, where'd that come from? That's kind of a cool little God just sort of reaching and go, damn it. So what you get here is listen, this is really sad. It's like 3 rounds. So the creation and the fall of man, the flood and the destruction of man, and Babel and the dispersion of man. These are all judgmental responses God has towards sin. But God at the end of chapter 11 says, you've proven you can't do it. Now let me show you I can do it. And he opens up this, you see the genealogies in there. But in the midst of all that, God births a whole new movement. I need you to turn to Genesis 12, because every subsequent theological development in the Bible springs from the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 12. Are you there? Okay. The Lord had said to Abram, remember his name is not Abraham until he starts becoming a father of many nations. He says, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. So in essence, he's saying, leave everything that you know and hold dear, and I'm going to tell you when to stop walking. You just start walking in faith. and I'll show you where you're supposed to land. Not many people would take that offer. But look at the 7 promises that God gives you in chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. 7 promises. He says, first of all, if I can get this, there we go. Oh, well, there's 3 of them. No, I'm only going to give you 1. I will make you into a great nation. Everybody say, great nation. Great nation. Okay, he's only one guy he's like 75, and his wife's probably 65 at this time. They have no children, and God says, you're going to be a great nation. And just in case you think I'm messing with you, I'm going to make you wait 25 more years before you get your first baby of the promise. That would make him 100. Nobody would say that was a work of God or a work of man, right? I mean, I know we're involved in the process, but 100? Okay, and she was 90. I will bless you. I will make your name great. Look at that. I'm going to make your name great. How many contemporaries of Abraham do you know their names? Not many. Sarah, right? It's because he didn't make their name great. He made Abraham's name great. And it is great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Look at this one. It's important, even politically. Whoever curses you, I will curse. The nation that turns its back on Israel will be cursed. Pay attention to this. It may not make sense politically. This is what God said. And by the way, it's proved out. Look at what happened to Great Britain when they started turning their back on Israel. They stopped being an empire. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. How many people? All peoples, all ethnic groups, all nations, all peoples on earth will be blessed through a man who did not even have a son. I want you to see something. The Israelites also celebrate Abraham. This is a picking up of this whole theme of building a great nation. And he uses, in Genesis 22, he actually uses the word seed. You probably can't read that, but it says, I will multiply thy seed. Have we heard anything about seeds yet? First couple of weeks here, right? The seed of the woman. It's just seed theology runs through the scripture. Now, you've got a guy that's going to be a great nation, but it's just him and his wife. So not much progress here, right? And then it's time to fill in some blanks here. So what do you need to have a great nation? You need 3 essential things, folks. You need people, you need order, and you need land. You can't have a great nation if it's just 2 people. I don't call that a great nation. I call that half a family. And then you need order. When we're down in Sinai, not in Sinai, but when we're in Egypt, there's no order whatsoever with these Jewish people that are growing in number. They don't get that till the law of Moses on Mount Sinai. And then last but not least, you can't have a great nation without some territory. You got to have land. So everybody say this with me. People, order, land. People, order, land. You got to have that to have a great nation. So let's watch God do it now. Are you ready? Okay? First of all, think about this. Abraham is given all these promises. He makes God happy because he believes God. But he's just one guy. God says at 75 years of age, he makes a promise he'll be a great nation with his descendants as numerous as the stars or grains of sand on the seashore. And you got to realize how ridiculous that must have sounded. But God takes one seed. Okay, no extra charge for this, but pay attention to me. Every time you have a significant movement in world history, God takes something that's dead and raises it to life. So expect a resurrection God. And he does it with Abraham. He's 75 years old, and God says, you're going to have to wait. He had to wait 25 years till he was reproductively dead. And his wife was 90. How many 90-year-olds here have had children? I don't mean in the past. I mean like this year. Right. It just doesn't happen. God raised both Abraham and Sarah reproductively from the dead to start a movement of building a nation. And look, by the time 1,000 years have come and gone, you got this huge population in a land with order under David and Solomon, which means it's a moderated theocracy with God in control, and a temple and a capital. Like the Jerusalem was the Sacramento of Israel. And it had far more religious significance too, by the way. But then remember the last promise in Genesis 12:3? And through you, all nations will be blessed. This is where God's going with history. He wants the whole world. Israel is not his favorite people. Israel is his chosen people to work through so that he could take his salvation to the whole world. It's just the channel. Okay? Pretty cool, huh? So, God births a nation. He calls Abraham. Abraham responds in faith. He sets out, who knows where, but he ends up in Canaan. He had a stop in this sojourn up in Haran, where his father died, and some of his relatives stayed there, but Abraham and his immediate family continued on down to Canaan. Remember, he's a guest in Canaan. This is not his land yet. He's a guest. He owned one small piece of property, which was the field and cave of Machpelah, where he eventually buried his wife, Sarah. That's all. And he was just a guest there. But what happens is, after he becomes a father, he did have a son through Sarah's handmaiden, Hagar, named Ishmael, but God continued. He said, that's not what I meant. I meant you and your wife will have a seed, promise. It will come from your loins, both of you. And so, when he's 100 years old, Isaac is born, and he goes, phew, now we're moving. We're 3 now. But then when he's 13 years later, about the time of what we would consider today Isaac's bar mitzvah, Isaac goes with his father on a 3-day journey, carrying wood on the back, in obedience to the father, climbing the altar, being willing to be killed as the son of the promise. And so Abraham's 113 at this time. Sarah's probably about 105. And God just said, I want to take you back from 3 and bring you back down to 2 so we can have a great nation. God doesn't always make sense. But what we see is Abraham willing to actually sacrifice his son. And then you see, isn't this interesting? The father's only beloved son, carrying the wood on his back, bound and willingly climbing on the altar, being willing to die. And then, in the last second, the angel stops him, and there's a provided ram that's stuck in the thicket that's a substitutionary sacrifice in place of Isaac. And he gives Isaac back to his father, resurrected. Every time God does something great, he takes something dead and raises it back to life. I'm telling you, we got a great God, people. We got a great God. And from Abraham being tested, he has Isaac, obviously, with his wife, Sarah, who was Sarai before, which meant princess, but Sarah means a mother of multitudes. And so as they become parents, their name changes because it's now identified with where they're going to go instead of where they've been, okay? So you've got the 12 patriarchs, which are the 12 sons of Jacob. If we start talking about this, you'll see that even today, Israel still produces postage stamps, like the only nation in the world, because they've got this Jewish history. But if you're interested in that kind of stuff, it's cool. Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac is the second patriarch. Not an awful lot is said amazing about this guy, except for that he believed God. He wasn't even able to get a wife for himself. Abraham, his daddy, had to arrange this, sending Eliezer back to Haran, which was where many in Abraham's family had settled on their way to Canaan, because the point is, it's not interracial marriage, it's don't mix faith systems. There's no command against interracial marriage. There is a very explicit command about marrying somebody who does not share your spiritual convictions. That's being unequally yoked. And so Abraham says, go get someone up there. If you remember Eliezer and Rebekah giving water to the camels. Always pay attention to girls that give water to camels. That's what I say. Always. And so she comes, they get married. They have 2 children that kind of are sibling rivalry, Jacob and Esau. Ever heard these names? And they finagled each other, but Jacob came out, getting the birthright and getting, even though he was the second born, it was just by a little bit. And then Esau wants to kill him. And Esau sold his soul so short for a bowl of soup, the bum. Anyways, he surely valued spiritual things, didn't he? So Jacob has to flee from his mother and father because Esau wants to kill him. On his way there, he has this dream with his head on the pillow at Bethel, which is the house of God, where God starts to make an agreement to be his God as well. And he promises to give a tithe, but there still seems to be a little bit of finagling with all of those dealings between Jacob. He was a manipulator. So what happens is Jacob goes all the way back to where Eliezer, Abraham's servant, had found a wife for Isaac. And that's where they look once again among those that shared some spiritual convictions for a wife. But he ran into somebody that was his equal as a manipulator, Laban. And just as he's finished working 7 years for Rachel because she was a hot child in the city. And but on that wedding night, they drink a little bit too much wine, and Laban tricks his new son-in-law and slips Leah in there first because she's the oldest daughter, okay? And so he has to marry Leah. He wakes up in the morning and goes, whoa, I did not agree to that. But then Laban says, well, work 7 more years and finish out the bridal week, and then I'll give you my other daughter as well. So he ends up with 2 wives, not what he had planned, and I can only bet what some of those conversations around the dinner table were like in the tent. Probably not the easiest conversations in the world, but let me talk to you a little bit about where this goes from here. Between Rachel and Leah Leah's handmaidens, they have 4 sons. They have 12 sons and 1 daughter named Dinah. Can you imagine? Dinah probably washed a lot of dishes. I know that's a chauvinistic statement. Stop it. Okay. But here's the kids, and they are also represented in Israeli stamps as well. And from chapter 37 on, what you have is a focus on one of these sons as a particular person to keep your eye on, okay? He was the second to last born, and yet he gets preferential treatment by his dad, who gives him a special jacket. You remember the coat of many colors? Anybody remember this? Is this the first time you've heard this? He gets a special jacket by his dad, and then his brothers deceive him, and they pretend to their dad that he's been killed. They put blood on the jacket. Then he goes down and he ends up in the house of Potiphar as a slave, and his wife grabs him by the jacket. He's always getting in trouble with jackets. Those jackets just get him deep. Yuckity-doo-dah. Okay. So what happens is, as these 12 boys grow up and the 11 boys see and they're jealous of their dad's preferential treatment of Joseph, they've had it, so they sell him into slavery, and they fake to their father saying he obviously was killed because here's his jacket with goat blood on it. He thought it was his boy's blood. And he grieves almost to the point of dying. But what happens in the meantime is that Joseph goes down to Egypt, and this is where you have to pay attention spiritually, okay? Let me just say, Jesus appears in chapter 1 when the light comes into the world. Jesus appears in chapter 3 as the seed of the woman. Jesus appears in the person of Isaac, who was the sacrifice and the father's only son. Jesus appears in Joseph as well as the one who was betrayed by his brothers, who later, instead of getting revenge when he had the power to do so, he forgave them because he saw God's greater purpose. Now, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but what are the 3 things you need to have a great nation? Look at, you can cheat on your notes here. What are the 3 things you need? You need people, you need order, and you need land. Okay, when Israel got to the 3rd generation and the 4th generation of patriarchs, they have now reached the mighty number of 70, okay? Including all kids and stuff like that. Here's the problem. They were guests in Canaan. And as they grew, they made the local inhabitants angry. You're guests. You're not supposed to have more children than us. Could you imagine someone say, hey, could I just come live with you for a while? And after having 10 kids in your home, you kind of get a little irked, right? Hey, listen, could you buy your own food and move out, you know? So there was no context for them to become a numerous people when they were stuck in a small spit of land where they were hosts or guests. So God used the betrayal of the brothers of Joseph to orchestrate events so that Joseph could go down to Egypt, end up serving in one of the key servants, Potiphar, to the Pharaoh, and then the wife tries to make a move on him. And by the way, you ever heard that about flee from sexual immorality? That's where that story comes from. He ran when Potiphar's wife tried to move on him, and then she accused him of actually, making an advance on her. And what I find interesting is that if Potiphar had really believed her, he would have killed Joseph on the spot. He actually believed Joseph's story, but he couldn't publicly shame his wife like that. So he ends up in jail. For doing what? The right thing. True or false, every time you obey God, you always get wonderful blessings in the immediate. Yeah, and no, it's not easy to follow God. It's right to follow God. So he ends up in prison, but in so doing, he interprets 2 dreams of the key baker and the cupbearer of the Pharaoh. And one of those dreams resulted in the baker being killed, but the cupbearer being back exalted to his position when Pharaoh was celebrating a birthday. And by the way, that's the first mention of a birthday in the Bible. And the only time I read of birthdays in the Bible, it makes me kind of not want to lose my head, because he got his head cut off on Pharaoh's birthday. So happy birthday if it's your birthday today. Keep your head about you, okay? And then Pharaoh has some other dreams. And they're two different dreams that mean the same thing. 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of scarcity. Nobody knew how to interpret it. But then the cupbearer said, oh yeah, there is a guy in prison, a Hebrew. Why don't you call him? So he's called in, and he tells the king exactly what he dreamed of Pharaoh, and exactly how to solve that problem and save Egypt. What Joseph's brother meant for evil, God meant for the furtherance of his plans and the salvation story. And in one day, Joseph goes from the pit of prison to the second most powerful human being on the earth at the time. You talk about humbling yourself in the sight of the Lord and he lifting you up and exalting you. He gets exalted from prison to the throne. And the only thing in which Pharaoh was greater, because Joseph was running Egypt during this time, was in name and in position. It was Joseph that was running Egypt. At the end of 7 years, towards the end of 7 years, even the people in Canaan are almost dead because of the drought and because of the famine. And so Joseph had had dreams many years before that these stalks of grain would bow down to his stalk. Got in trouble for that. He had dreams of multiple dreams that showed that he would one day be exalted above his whole family, even above his father and his, not his immediate mother, because she died, Rachel, but Leah would bow down to him like 12 stars before him. And guess what happens? His brothers come to Egypt, don't know who they're looking at, and they bow down to Joseph in fulfillment of his dreams. But the problem is, there's one missing that didn't go without that group, and that was Benjamin, his brother by Rachel, the only other boy born to Rachel. And so he sends back for Benjamin, and the dad freaks out and says, if you don't bring him back, I'll die, because he had another favorite now, right? And they all get there, and Judah during this time ends up becoming a leader of the tribes by saying he would volunteer himself for the safe return of Benjamin. So finally, one of the brothers is behaving nobly, and guess who becomes the tribe that produces all future leaders? Judah. God's on it, man. He's on it. So they come to buy food, and it's from like chapter 37 to the end of Genesis, where you see this beautiful story where he could have clobbered them. He had all the power in the world, but it wasn't a vengeful thing. He just wanted to be reunited with his family, and he works it in such a way that not only do they send food home to Jacob and family, but they send carts and say, you come to me, because the famine's not going to be over for some time. And so they all move down to Egypt, and some people think, oh, what a bummer. No, it was the only place at that time with a shortage of food where they could grow drastically in number and be a numerous people. God had to get them down to Goshen, separate from the Egyptians, despised because of the fact they were shepherds, that there was enough distance that they could grow and grow and grow. And the Jewish people had children about every 3 weeks or so. Their gestation period was much faster. And so, just, as I said last week, they just pop them out, right? So Joseph and his family moved down to Goshen, all right? And they grow in number. This is also the time period of the patriarchs when the story of Job is committed to writing. So Job may very well be the very first book ever written in the Bible, and its story clearly occurs during patriarchal cultural period, okay? If you just look at the way they lived and livestock and view of land and all that. And then Joseph dies, and the Jews continue to grow, but things don't end up being so good for the Jewish people because they're forced, let me get this right if I can get it, they're forced into slavery. A new Pharaoh rises, and he says, hey, these people could build some great things for us. So they force them into brick making and its servitude. And does anybody know how long that period lasted? 400 years. 400 years is a long time. Guess what they did for 400 years? They made bricks and they made babies. That's what they did. And they became slaves, but they became a numerous people. Check the first part of a great nation off. By the time you go to Egypt as 70, and they leave Egypt as 2.5 million people. That's a lot of babies. Okay? So are you seeing the hand of God behind the bad stuff that seemed to be what was happening? Only the people that look for it by faith see the God story in it. But it's there, folks. And then this is when God raises up another type of Christ. someone that was born of their people, someone that was raised up to save the people. Now, it's interesting also, Moses means drawn up or drawn from the water. And for those of you that are discouraged with the way your life is going right now, just know, even Moses started his basket case. So there's hope, okay? All right, just want you. Okay, so he tries to save Israel when he discovers he's a Jew. It didn't go so well. If you've ever watched the Ten Commandments, he gets in trouble and has to flee out into Midian, the desert, the Sinai desert. And 40 years of operating as a shepherd on the backside of the Midian desert can teach you a lot of lessons you can't learn any other way. And at the end of that 40-year period, which would make him 80 at this time, he sees this crazy bush that's burning but not being consumed. He draws near, and God calls him. He tells him, God says, I am that I am. Go back and save your people. I've heard their cry. Newsflash, God hears when we're suffering and we pray. And so he goes back and he confronts Pharaoh with the help of his brother Aaron. Apparently, maybe he did stutter, I don't know, but he was afraid to talk. And so God said, well, then I'll just let your brother be your mouthpiece for you. And that's what happened. And his message to Pharaoh was, let my people go so that they may serve me or worship me. He said it repeatedly. And Pharaoh said, okay, this isn't a hard question. Pharaoh said, these are my slaves. I have free labor. You're not taking my free labor away. And so there's this big contest between God and Pharaoh. And God sends 10 plagues to put Egypt on their knees. And I was probably a Christian for 15 years before I discovered what actually happens here is that God is confronting all the false gods of Egypt and showing himself more powerful than them. Remember when he throws his rod down and it becomes a snake, and then the magicians do it with multiple snakes, but Moses' snake eats their snakes? Remember the leprosy trick? Right? And then, listen, the most powerful god to the Egyptians was the Nile. It provided their food source. So what does God do with the Nile? He turns it to blood. Their second most powerful god was Raz. He was the god of the sun. So what does God do with the light of the sun? He causes darkness, oppressive darkness. He has a god of the frogs that come from the Nile. He fills the land with the stench of frogs. There's a god of the beasts, and he strikes the beasts with a plague and brings them to the... he just goes, fake god after fake god after fake god, strips them of all their power, demonstrates his superiority to any other god because all other gods are just idols, and then he sets his people free. That's cool. Now, turn not to Isaiah, but to Exodus chapter 9, because this will show you where God's going with this. There's so many people that don't know what God's doing with history that this all seems like a bunch of disconnected behavior. It is not. Look at verses 13 through 16, because this is what God says. He says, then the Lord said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so that they may worship me. Or this time I will send the full force of my plagues. They kept getting worse and worse and worse against you and against your officials and your people. So that, look at this, here's your purpose. So you may know that there is no one like me in all of Egypt. So that you may know in all subsequent generations there is no one like me in the world, on the earth. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up. God raised Pharaoh up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. That's what God wants. He's got his eye on all nations. And he used Pharaoh as a demonstration that even the most wicked hearts will have to bow to the only true God. And so what is the last of these plagues? The last of these plagues is to strike the firstborn of all families from the Pharaoh down to the slave, and strangely enough, bypass Israel so they did not lose a single person. This is where you get your first Passover, but it's a reminder that God is absolutely sovereign over human history. And so what does God do? Before the very last plague, follow this, folks, because this is critical to understanding God and Route 66. He says to the Israelites, take a young, blemish-free male lamb, selected on the 10th day of Abib, take it into your home. Now, what happens when you take a little animal and bring it around your children? They fall in love with this thing, probably gave it a name. It probably wasn't lamb chops either. They're thinking permanent, and then God says on day 4, cut its neck, capture its blood in front of your kids. And then what I want you to do is on this night, I want you to wear your sandals, get travel-worthy clothing, and pass. I want you to take the blood that you captured from this innocent lamb. Anybody seeing Jesus yet? And I want you to paint it on the door frames of your house. This is how they would do it. They'd take like a hyssop kind of plant, which is a broom, and they would sweep into the blood straight up, dripping on the ground, so there'd be this vertical line of protection. And then they would put it on the sides too. Look what you just did. And then I want you to take all your family, and I want you to pass under the blood of the Lamb. Because when you do, you are protected and safe. But you would only do that if you believed it would work. It's called faith in action. So they're going in under the blood, and then he said, that night I want you to roast that lamb indoor and feed on the lambs. Anybody ever heard of the Lord's Supper? Okay, feed on the lamb, take its life into you, and come under the blood of the lamb so that you can be saved. And then, when all of the firstborn of Egypt who didn't do this lose a family member, their first family member, then they're going to come after you. And then after doing this and starting to travel, you're going to have your back against the Red Sea, and you're going to look at the Egyptian army, but it'll be the last time you do, because I want you to believe me enough to have Moses stretch his staff over to this body of water and split it into 2 walls of water and walk all the way through, and you will never see your enemies again. I am releasing you from the land of bondage and slavery. What a story. And so, folks, what I want you to see as you think about this is that this is actually all prefiguring Christian salvation and deliverance from bondage of sin. And so this morning, my appeal to you is this. If you really want to follow God's Route 66 and not just have it satisfy your curiosity, you have to walk through 2 walls of water as well. You have to come under the protection of the blood of the Lamb. You need to partake of the very life of Christ to give you eternity. You got to do that. And this whole deliverance out of the land of slavery is prefiguring our deliverance through coming under the blood of Christ and walking through the baptismal walls as we leave the land of slavery and we're baptized into a new life with God and a new future with God. And so this morning, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but as we think about the crossing of the Red Sea, we put this insert in your programs this morning. And I'm going to put this up on the screen as well, and I'm going to read it to you. And if this is something you would like to say to God this morning, we're going to give you a chance to do that, okay? This story is a story of redemption and salvation. So why not expose ourselves completely to what God has come to give us? This is what it says. If you can't read it on the screen, you've got this in your bulletin. Lord Jesus, I receive you today as my Passover lamb. By faith, I choose to come under the protection of your blood sacrifice on the cross to give me eternal life. Forgive me of my sin and rebellion. I believe you are my only way of salvation. I receive you into my life as Lord and Savior. Just as the Jewish nation experienced salvation by hiding under the blood of the Lamb and marching through the Red Sea on dry ground, I'm asking you today for spiritual deliverance and salvation. Thank you for making this new life possible by dying for me and then raising from the dead. I surrender myself in faith to you. Amen. If you've never prayed something like this, folks, this is how you cross a line of eternity. This is how you turn to the saving God for salvation, who is so much more willing to do that than you can imagine. And the Passover of the Jews was simply a shadow of not just temporary salvation, but eternal salvation by coming under the blood of the Lamb. So if this is something you'd like to pray, we're just going to go quiet for 60 seconds, and I'm going to ask you to talk with your God. And if this is something you know you need, surrender to Christ this morning, okay? And then I've just got one more thing to say, and then we're done. Let's pray.
Father, I just want to thank you that this is a church that is not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God unto the salvation of all who believe. And so, Lord, as people turn to you, as they turn to you in the first hour, as I believe they're turning to you now, and they will again in the next hour, Lord, show yourself strong and merciful and powerful to save. Lord, would you introduce people into your forever family as a result of being here today? And I thank you that the gospel still rings out loud and clear through all of the voices and all the spiritual fog in our world. We love you and we thank you for Jesus, who offers us a way back into your family. Amen. I've got one more thing I'd like to ask you to do. If this is something you prayed for the first time, I'm going to ask you to actually go public with that and write down your information so we can drop you a note this week and identify yourself as such. And what we're going to do at the end of this hour is, right now, but please turn the volume down so I can still say a couple of things. I want to put a couple of walls of water on the screen here so that you can see that Route 66 actually passes through 2 walls of water. And here's what I want you to do. If you prayed that prayer for the first time, I want you to come right here to the narrow way, because this is God's way of salvation. And I want you to self-identify, as several people have already done this morning, and just drop it in the narrow way box before you leave the auditorium this morning. So with that being said, I'm going to call our ushers forward. We're going to take a moment to receive our tithes and offerings this morning and call the worship team back, because they're going to lead you in a song. And then after that song's over, we're going to put the walls of water back up here so that you can walk right in between them through the narrow road and continue on God's Route 66, okay? Lord, thank you for this morning. Thank you, God, for the beautiful and historical story of the way that you rescued your people, Israel, so they could continue to bring your salvation to the world. And Lord, as people that are enjoying the promises made to Abraham, thank you that there were people of faith in the past that walked this route. And now, God, I pray that you encourage us as a people who love Christ to follow you faithfully and to follow you boldly. Lord, we pray that you would demonstrate your power by saving people this morning. Receive these gifts as another token of our faith. We love you this morning, and we believe you, and we know that makes you happy. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen.